Okay, Mick, in the last fight, you talked about Kailash. I got a feeling I was there that day, but and it was in training with Martin Pipe, so you had a
Yeah,
connection with the Pipe yard, who was the hottest yard in
I
the
know.
country at that point.
Well, I'll never forget once we were talking about Ginger Noel off camera, the lad books rep. He was a slight relation to Aidan O'Brien and his family. You know, they're all that area. And O'Brien one day, when Pipey was there, come running across to Pipey. I know Nicky Henderson, a lot of people went to see what his methods were. I'd seen the horse run on the Saturday night when he was trained by somebody, can't remember who. Pick up the Sporting Life on the Monday for sale. I rang up Pipey, didn't know him particularly well at the time. I said, go up to 30 grand for the horse. He bolted up in the bumper, Richard Johnson rode him. I think it went for about 35, 36, which would be enough. You're talking about the mid-90s. Anyhow, he won 4 bumpers. And then he went novice hurdling. He won his first 4 novice hurdles, including the one at the Paddy Power meeting, the best novice hurdle of the year up till then. He was a fantastic trainer. He never spent time in the booze bar. I don't want to go against trainers, but that's where most of them congregate. He was his own man. You know, he had the best jockey, the best national hunt jockey ever. The people that say Ruby Walsh. I find myself privileged to be in the era of Tony McCoy and Lester Piggott, you know, and he was a lovely lad. I'll come back to this story in a moment. I used to be in a charity called the Archie Scott. I was the vice chairman. Sammy Nixon, you remember Sammy on the Aways, still alive at 94. He used to come up. We used to get all the old Tic Tacs and the old boys have been Clarks every year about October time to Stratford for the Archie Scott race. And McCoy used to come in before, go through the card with him. You couldn't lick Freddie Winter's boots and all that guy. He loved it and he'd stop after racing. He was a real good kid, Tony, a very ordinary lad. His parents should be very proud how they brought him up. You know, but getting back to Pipe, he was a fantastic trainer. But I stood horses for 3 and 4 grand every race. More at the bigger meetings, the group meetings. But I couldn't handle the pressure with him. You know, I was offered a 6-figure sum, but nothing to what I'd have been offered nowadays with him. Next thing, he run on the big Boxing Day meeting. He was favourite to win the big novice hurdle. He finished 4th. He was going well. He wrapped about the second last. Lame, never run for 2.5 years. I did 50 grand in cold blood, you know. And he came back. He was never the same horse. Won a few races, but that was the end of that, which always happens. I would say if you get chance, there's an old Jewish saying, never no harm in taking a profit, you know. But nowadays I would have got 300 or 400 grand for him.
Was that your first foray into owning?
Yeah, I had horses with Pipe afters, but you're lucky to get a horse like him. I'd always had greyhounds with Geoffrey de Mulder. It was fantastic. He was fantastic. Very little difference, you know, between a genius and a crank. I'd probably be the same, you know, and Geoffrey was the same. Even Martin was eccentric, you know, but, you know, it was unprecedented because the greyhound, she won 5 Group 1 races, you know, she was fantastic. I loved her as much. I used to walk her every day and everything, go at Meriden, be a 10 or 15 miles from her. It was fantastic. Nothing lasts forever. Your looks, your ability to do anything, nothing lasts forever.
Did you make it pay back in these horses and dogs that you owned?
Probably with Carly. Pipey was good. When he said they'd win, they would win. You know, he was good. No 2 ways. He was the best. You know, whether time caught up with him or other people copied his methods, I don't know. You know, I think it was a tough gig for David to follow. How'd you follow somebody like Martin Pipe? Alec Ferguson is the typical one with Manchester United. I thought David Moyes was the right man at the time. You know, he probably wasn't, or the players wouldn't play for him. It's a tough act to follow.
Now, Martin's dad was Dave the bookie.
I
Did you have
loved him.
much dealings with Dave?
I loved him. He was a good fella. He would think, you know, isn't a story for about Dave. Do you remember the list? The bookies used to have to pay £11 for the list. He had an old boy as a clerk. He had an old nail of a car, and he'd drive up, and the clerk had to write all the list out. That was Dave. I'd go down to Nicholshane. There'd be piles of tyres and everything. He was a dealer, you know, buy and sell. He'd think nothing could give him Martin for $750,000 for a chopper, for the helicopter. You'd see him dig in the ditch. I used to bet next to him. At one stage you could bet on the boards, and I used to bet next to him. He'd have his back to me at Wolverhampton. Never known life. So the one day I stood right at the back of him, about a 6-4 chance. 1.5 to 1 tickets, all nonsense. 1.5 to 1 tickets, 16. 17, 60 pound a 40 ticket, 18. 300 to 2 Jimmy O's, 60 pound a 40. And all of a sudden he turned round and just looked at me. You know, but he was a good fella, Dave. I got a lot of time for Dave Pipe.
And you mentioned Stephen Little before. Any stories about Stephen? Because he's one of my previous interviewees.
Yeah, well, Stephen, he had good punters. He had I better not say the names of his punters, but what his price was, you could literally have what you wanted on with him. He would never crack. You'd know if I was losing. For instance, you wouldn't know with him. He was just he was good for the ring. You know, he was very good for the ring. I think he had a bad time when it was a so-called crooked. Remember the amateur race somewhere? I think Chepstow. I think he was the fall guy. I never seen him. I haven't seen him for years and years. I don't know if he's still about. He was another eccentric, basically.
He's still on the race course. He still goes punting.
Does he go punting? Well, arbin or punting?
Who knows?
Mix. Yeah.
He does it to keep his brain active.
He actually named. I love cats. My wife won't let me have cats now because I travel 6 months everywhere, but I love cats. And he named a cat Fletcher and Henwood. Johnny Henwood, we were right next to him, being a nuisance to him, I suppose. I know he named the 2 cats after us. I liked him.
So who were the other characters at the time?
Bookies or punters. Well, Dodger, you remember Dodger was Dodger, when I think about him, he come to me one day at Hereford. Now, I'll be half in with you, we go down the book with Summit. He won 100 jars, I'd done about $4,000 on the race, you know, plus he's 4 on top. Oh dear, Dodger. But he was a trier, you know, up and down the country. He was a laugh and a joke. There was lots. Johnny Goff was a professional punter. He was good at laying his money out. You know, I wouldn't put no money back in the ring. You know, and unless it was, you know, and I put money in the ring beforehand, knowing it was going to, hoping it was going to collapse. And Goffy might have a 3,000 or 480 with me, a 3,000 or 1 something. I wouldn't put the money because I know I got the favourite to have a go at. If ever he backed a favourite, which was very rare, very, very rare, half a dozen times a year, if that, then I would graft with it. You know, I'd back it back. But there was a lot of professional punters about. People went to gamble. And bookies went to gamble. You know, it was a good game. You'd have your ups and downs. Every bookie, March, Cheltenham. I'd come back on the Saturday or the Sunday before Cheltenham. Up till August, end of August, York. That was about your spell. But there was a lot of characters about. You had to have your wits about. You're any capital city. London's the capital city. Cockneys would rather, I'm generalising now, so any boo boys down in London, they would rather get a pound crooked than £2 a straight way. But you know, you got to have your wits about you to survive in the capital cities.
So how many people do you think would have been making money punting on course in the mid-80s?
The professionals would be making money because they would be professional.
Would have been?
What percentage?
And how many people do you think would have been a regular professional punter back in those days?
There'd be plenty of people that'd be regular professionals. Stevie Lewis Hamilton was a disciple of Goffey. He would make his own card. He was similar. He was a winner. Johnny Lights was a punter, later become a bookie. Dudley Roberts was more a punter than a bookie, even though he was a rails bookie. People like them were hot cookies. You know, they'd have a card, they'd have connections, they'd put plenty of work in. So a certain percentage, I'd want to be with those people. If they'd taken 6-4 and I've got to take 11-8, so what? You know, when you're with professionals, because they'd end up like miles less than that. So I'll tell you a story about a fella called Edward St. George. Do you know him? He had horses with Henry Cecil. He had fantastic horses. He turned up to Warwick one day, a Saturday night meeting. He got a runner. Nobody on the rails except me. Typical billionaire. He owned a shipping company in the Bahamas with Jack Hayward, who was famous for owning Wolverhampton. So he turned up. He said, "Excuse me, I hills a lad book, sir." I said, "No, Mr. St. George, can I help you?" He said, "I'm afraid I haven't got no cash on me." I said, "That's all right, Mr. St. George. What can I do for you? Can you put me £2,000 on my horse?" "Certainly, Mr. St. George." I returned him a 4,002. I think the SP was about 5-4, 100 yards. Gave him the £4,000. Now, any millionaire, billionaire, love cash. From that day onwards, I was his pal. He wouldn't have many bets with me. He'd tell me, listen, I should be back in this. He might have it, can you put this on for the wife? So we'd had about 5 or 6, it had gone on for 5 or 6 months. I always used to leave England and for 10 weeks after Christmas, come back for Cheltenham. I sent him an account, just sent him an account of 600 or 700 quid. When I came back, he'd sent me a lovely letter saying, your accountancy methods are very strange. I would like you and your wife to come anytime you want to come on vacation to the Bahamas. You're more than welcome as my guest. He was a big owner, he had classic horses. And he was a good fella. Ordinary. I liked ordinary people. I don't care where people got money from. I couldn't stand the toughs at Ascot talking down to you and stuff, you know, all the inbreds and that sort of stuff. We'd be the only country in the world where the people pay a 70, 80 pound fine to go on the racetrack, not to have a bet, to get boozed at twice the double the odds for the price of booze, you know, and to wave at the Queen. That's England.
You were talking. I'll take you back to what we were talking about just before that, with all the bookmakers at Dudley Roberts, well connected. All people, people saying that, you know, the owners would back a horse with you, so you'd know just bang off. As soon as the betting exchanges came in, all that finished, didn't it? Finished
overnight. See, the old days. This is the story. I was in with about 3 or 4 horses that were supposedly not with us. When 2 of the first 3 won and the other one got beaten in a photo, that was my time and listening to stories. The old days, if horses was no good, they doped horses, didn't they? Pincher-Ischel was doped. They couldn't profit by it. What would you do if you knew the odds-on favourite was out the race? You'd back the second in. Is it that easy? You know, so all of a sudden the exchanges come in. Racing won undoubtedly. Let's pull no punches here now. Racing's never been 100% straight. Never ever been, never ever will be. Even the better trainers, they don't get the horses off for its life, do they? Everything's geared towards Ascot and the classics. So once the exchanges come in, there could be jiggery pokery, the laying came in, that was the start and the end. Initially, I remember Patrick Kinghorn was with at the races at the time. I was always on the television. It had just started Betfair. David Hood was a good kid, David Hood. He was the Eels propaganda man. I don't know who it was for, I can't think who it was for Betfair, blowing the bugle for them. Then it was my turn. And I said to him, in the short term, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to anybody connected with racing. I said, in the not so short term, it's the ruin of it. And that's what's happened. Racecourse bookmaking now. Ben Keith's an exception. He's the one that will take your tables on and stuff like that. The rest of them, most of them, I would think probably half to 3/4 of the ring, put it all back. They're commission agents. And even if you analyse Betfair, for the money they turn over, a 2% commission, any other business turning that money over, you'd have the chief accountant and the treasurer at the end of the year when the figures are brought down. They're not getting big money out of it, what the turnover is. You know, so most bookies, basically all they do, they push your button to 2% or 1% or whatever it is, green up at the end of it, big deal. They get the 60 or 70 quid a day, times 5 or 6 times they go out, get the 300 quid a week. I find it I don't tell anybody how to bet.